Did they go on the upper side of the thing? Did they remember to put that on the map? Because I didn't see the map for
They
that
did,
side.
they did.
And Chief Newsom said they
People
got it.
took pictures. Yes, they
Nice.
did. That was a wonderful thing.
Nice.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, when we got to talking, and we're like, there can't be that many kids that'll be up there to offset our bags of candy. I said, if anything, we'll be increasing our diabetic calls.
Yeah, there you go.
Did I tell you that I went to get the bag of candy? It was open.
Yeah.
The one that I was gonna
they
donate?
called- No.
The one I was gonna donate because I had that bag of unopened candy. Yeah.
You should have brought it up. Didn't you?
Okay. Well, like Alan told me that when he was trying to donate candy, they were like, oh, it has to be an
Oh,
unopened.
no.
But I got to my house, I went to grab it. It
We're
was
far enough into the.
and it was open. And I was like, who opened this? And I was like, damn it, Scott, sneaking
Oh,
candy.
we wouldn't have cared.
He said it wasn't
If we
him,
knew
though.
who it came from, it'd be one thing. If
Yeah.
not, it'd be like,
Yeah.
like Brenda here. We throw it. No kidding. Brenda, we did try to hand out candy cans, but it seemed like more came back than got handed out. Really? But then it started pouring rain, and everybody just like.
I know, I was looking at the front door when you guys, we were coming around. I was watching down the street and all the little kids and everything.
Yep, that says Patrick.
It did. And what's funny is Chief or North Pole came across, he was like, so this says it'll be about a 15-minute window, and then somebody piped up on the radio, clock started. We had our little elves in the bunker keeping the duty crew was behind us, so they brought their trucks up, put it over the two little girls that was helping us. My crew was a Santa, and he was a rock star. He didn't get a rain or shine. He still did it. He got out, kneeled down. Every kid talked to every kid, asked them what they wanted for Christmas. And, yeah. And last minute, PetSmart really pulled through. Like, yes, they called the station, and they called me, and I got the Winfrey thing. And they got a hold of Winfrey, and Winfrey went to like 3 different PetSmarts. And had filled his truck full of bags of stuffed animals. He had just enough, so, yeah. But then the ones you brought were highly coveted. They did not last long at all. She said, our kids are so cute. Where did this come from? Like, oh, I know, but they just was like, these didn't come from PetSmart. They don't have a squeaker in them. I was like, that's fine. But yeah, they had fun. It was a good turnout. And the rain, I mean, it was a 15-minute pour, and then it got cold. Didn't rain anymore, and then we finished up. Then we took everything to the kids up to the nursing home.
Not real bad, I mean, but yeah.
Only one of the
You
ladies
know,
who was going around.
It
We
was
didn't.
fine, my son.
And then the fire marshal was able to make sure the appointment was
It's
inspected.
been so busy. I even saw that the store right now.
Yeah, they want to try to figure out, they're getting a new puppy this coming weekend. They're trying to figure out how they can get in. There's a snowboat there where you can get in there and have a picture taken like you're a snowboat. See if they can get their new puppy. Yeah. Oh my gosh. When I started some shopping, I thought, okay.
Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Linda.
Yeah.
Hi, Debbie.
And see, we
was gym class today?
rode the streetcar.
We're still missing you.
Yeah,
We
well,
rode the streetcar.
won't be
My
long.
son
But
son
then
lives
you're
on
gonna
Main
be
Street
gone.
behind the courthouse.
How
And then
long?
there's on 7th Street, there is a
January and February, I do believe.
station, where we put the streetcar, and on the weekends, the bank lets you park in there free. So then we got on the streetcar and went down.
Babysitting the kids for a month down there.
Yeah.
That sounds like
Yeah.
And two.
Cancun
What the heck?
Yeah.
and warm weather. Fun. That's all I've got to say. Have a good time. Sure hope to.
What is
Be
it?
fun. You'll have a good time. It'll be warm.
I got, oh, I'm trying to.
Where you go?
No. I need to replace.
You don't know yet. You
Yeah.
don't know yet?
Friend of mine
What the hell
said,
was that?
I'm trying to be here. Take your good husband.
Traveling is repairing flooring in my house.
Yeah.
Garage door, and so, I don't think I'm traveling, because my son is the one.
Let's go get some
French
sun.
with Europe, buying a French.
Her fault.
Oh,
I had to look. Jesus.
But they're not gonna have children.
Are you Jesus, Sarah, now?
So that's the baby. City. At least we stress.
Yeah.
Hello.
Well, that was,
Always.
the first one.
Something about being in this room, I get so cold.
It's warmer today than what
I don't know what my problem is.
It was just one of those things, his siblings, his parents, relatives, you know.
We can actually see how tiny he
There's
is.
something with him, but, so that's stressful job and that. So I got.
He has a, yeah, and he has a real beard.
You spelled my name right. First time in 11 years.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Everyone will say,
I'll take it as long as I don't pay for the bill.
Okay, that's what I.
Dr. Hart started. I didn't use it.
I know, right? You gotta make use of it when you can.
Yeah.
I did, but then nothing.
I'm trying to get the TV so we can watch.
My daughter found it on the internet.
You all have a call right now. I saw her lady bring the package.
Mine is taller than me, and she's 15, my youngest.
Oh.
It's not approved, it's approved in the budget. Didn't change the salaries. They were changing the budget line, not on the ordinance.
Wow.
Right? So.
So if you change between sophomore and
It's not.
because it's a two-year appointment.
Shall we stand for the Lord's Prayer, please?
Yeah.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Calling the meeting together at 5:30. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Chairman, would you call the roll, please?
Gallagher.
Here.
Messina.
Here.
Jacoby.
Present.
Scarborough.
Here.
Moss.
Here, sir.
Langner.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Do you have anything you wanted to add about some corrections of some spellings?
I've made those corrections, and that would be what I asked Mayor Smith to sign, and it would be what will go in the book.
Anything else? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Gallagher.
Yes.
Messina.
Yes.
Jacoby.
Yes.
Scarborough.
Yes.
Moss.
Yes, sir.
Langner.
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
I would like to accept the resignation in the 3rd Ward of Alderman Page. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher.
Yes.
Messina.
Yes.
Jacoby.
Yes.
Scarborough.
Yes.
Moss.
Yes, sir.
Langner.
Yes. Hate to, but yes.
Yes.
In accordance to the Missouri State Statute 77.450, I would like to appoint Anthony Crawford to fill the unexpired term of Alderman Page. Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Has there been discussion related to the compatibility of the two offices held by Mr. Crawford?
Mr. Mayor, if Mr. Crawford is appointed, he will have to resign from his collector's position he has with the city. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's my question.
Anybody else? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Gallagher.
Yes.
Messina.
Yes.
Jacoby.
Yes.
Scarborough.
Yes.
Moss.
Yes, sir.
Langner.
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Chapman, would you please give the oath of office to Mr. Crawford?
Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Anthony Crawford,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I possess all the qualifications
that I will possess all the qualifications
for the position of Alderman
for the position of Alderman
as prescribed by law,
as prescribed by law.
that I will support the Constitution
I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and the state of Missouri,
and the state of Missouri,
the provisions of all laws
and provisions of all laws
of this state
of this state
affecting fourth-class cities
affecting fourth-class cities
and the ordinances of the city
and the ordinance of the city
of Pleasant Valley, Missouri.
of Pleasant Valley, Missouri.
And I will faithfully demean myself,
And I will faithfully demean myself,
so help me God.
so help me God.
I wish to welcome you back, Mr. Crawford. Okay. Mr. Chapman, is there anybody wishing to make a public comment?
Yes, I have a couple of speakers that have requested.
And this is Callahan.
That's very challenging.
Callahan, would you please come forward?
Thank you. I have a couple of things tonight. Ruth, you and I had discussed several months ago, I came to you with some concerns about our city ordinance, excuse me, mapping out our wards, and the verbiage does not match what the election board has. Have you gotten any resolution to that?
I think that sheet of paper that was given to you with the description with the map was not the ordinance language. That's what I've been told.
Okay, well, they don't, I mean, they don't match
Correct.
what the city is saying for the ward. How do I say this? The outline for each ward does not match what the election board says. So that's where I'm a little,
The map is correct. Apparently, there's two different verbiages floating around. One with the ordinance, which is supposedly correct. I have not seen the ordinance. And the other one is a sheet of paper that outlines what those boundaries are.
okay, can I ask again that you look at that and see if,
I will ask the city clerk to produce that ordinance.
okay? Okay, and then my second thing is, with Mr. Crawford now taking a seat as the alder person and vacating the city collector position, can I give it a description of what the responsibilities are for that position, number one, and number two, when will did you already resign from the collector's position in order to take this seat, or are you now dual positions?
Right now, I'm dual until I resign.
Okay. And can I get a copy then of whatever the job description, so to speak, is for a city collector?
You wish what the city collector is?
Yes.
And used to collect the taxpayers, but the county does that now.
Right.
This is shaped.
Mr. Mayor, the city clerk will provide that,
Yeah,
so,
they'll provide it.
thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Ms. Callaghan, wishing to speak to
She just.
I did.
Yes, Dad.
Patrick Gallagher.
the,
That's Patrick Gallagher.
oh. Sorry, I couldn't read them.
I'm sorry, my handwriting is sometimes not the
I
greatest.
can now.
I'm used to writing it so many times. My name is Patrick Gallagher, and I'm a small business owner in Pleasant Valley. At the last meeting, my family's business was brought up in a way that I found concerning, and I am here during these 5 minutes solely as a private citizen and business owner to address this matter. David said it's interesting who you catch who don't have business occupation licenses and points to me. I say it's interesting who you catch not doing the responsible amount of research before hurling false accusations and lies at business owners. To prevent similar misunderstandings in the future, here's an example of how thorough research could be conducted. Call it theatrical, but I'll play the role of the city official. I hear Patrick owns a business in Pleasant Valley. His wife does HVAC work, and Patrick does IT work. Well, what is his business's names? Let me look through the PV business licenses to see if I can find it. Yep, there it is, Gallagher Holdings LLC doing business as JPG Service. Let me see if their business is properly filled with the state of Missouri. I'm going to go to the Missouri Secretary of State's website and perform a search for a business entity. I'm going to type in Gallagher Holdings and hit search. One result returned and its status is active. Let me click on it, then click filings. I see the business's articles of organization. I know from my business and municipal experience that a business is authorized by Missouri Statute 347.035 to be created to conduct any lawful business or purpose within the state. I also know that the articles of organization required in RSMO's 347.037 has to state the purpose for which the business is to be formed, as found in RSMO 347.039, and that such statement can be narrowly tailored and specific, or as broad as the transaction of all lawful business. Let me view Gallagher Holdings LLC's articles of organization. Yep, the purpose described in bullet point 2 says the purpose of Gallagher Holdings is to operate and conduct business activities legally permitted in the state of Missouri. I know that a broad purpose allows the business to engage in business activities that may or may not be limited to a single industry or vocation. Well, did the state of Missouri approve the articles of organization for Gallagher Holdings? Yes, they did, as the certificate of organization says Gallagher Holdings LLC filed its articles of organization with this office, and that filing was found to conform with the Missouri LLC Act. Well, let me go look at the Pleasant Valley business license application. Patrick's occupation license states that his description is mechanical construction services and IT consulting services. And did we issue him a current business license that states business activity as mechanical, construction, and IT? Yep, it looks like the business is good to go. Okay, I'm Patrick again. David claimed at the last public board meeting that a separate license is required for Jen's transactions and Patrick's transactions and cited 2 statutes. Over the last 2 weeks, I have deconstructed each argument and proven why David was wrong in his understanding. What's embarrassing isn't a resident running a small family business in compliance with state and local law, but rather that such a matter was raised in a public meeting without thorough research. The public relations section of the employee handbook reminds our employees that residents judge all of us by how we treat them. It is extremely important to be courteous, friendly, prompt, and helpful. Your contacts with the public and any communications you send reflect not just on you, but also on the professionalism of the city of Pleasant Valley. I believe adhering to these values in all city matters will help maintain trust and collaboration between the city and its residents. The spreadsheet that David pointed to in the last meeting on the TV screen is the list of all issued business licenses for 2024. Essentially, the information from the application for a business license is copied into the spreadsheet. The business activity column for my business license said mechanical/construction/IT. The spreadsheet clearly indicated information about my business's activities, which could have been reviewed more carefully to avoid misunderstandings by simply resizing the business activities column. David's inquiry could have been handled privately with me, like he should handle any business licensing question, and saved himself and the city the embarrassment of a public spectacle. Any future questions about my business licensing can be directed to the contact information provided on my business license application. I remain committed to cooperating with the city and ensuring that all licensing requirements are met. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify this matter.
Okay, as the mayor's comment, I would like to thank 2 people. Chief McKinley, on your shopping with the cops, that was extremely good. And I'd like to thank Chief Newsom on his fire truck with the Sandy. That was extremely good for the kids, and I want to thank you both. The city attorney has no comment. Okay. Chief Knudsen, do you have anything? Oh,
No.
For the alderman comments,
okay.
I just have a quick comment. Just want to do the reminder that we still have the 5 vacancies on the ethics committee. So if anyone from the public is interested in joining that committee, please reach out to Matthew Chapman. He can give you either information to see if it's the right fit for you, just get you more information if you know anyone you think might be a good fit for it. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer any questions that you might have if you or someone you know is interested in filling one of those vacancies. That is it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Chief, I got ahead of myself. Okay. City Clerk, Mr. Chapman, do you have anything to?
I had a couple items on my report that required board action. And the board needs to nominate someone to be board president with the resignation of Alderman Page.
Is that an appointment from the mayor or is it nominated by the board? Do we know?
What, just the?
It's a nomination, it's a board's decision.
It's a board, it's not a nomination from the.
That's correct.
Okay.
I nominated and you all.
No.
Sorry, for the board president position.
For the board.
Oh, you all.
Yeah, perfect.
I have nothing to do with
Gotcha.
that. Only if there's a tie, then I break it.
So is that open right now?
Yes.
That was, Alderman Page was the board president.
I nominate Anthony Crawford.
Second.
Any other nomination? Do I have a second?
Yes. Yes, you did.
Mr. Coleman? Any discussion?
So I'm, just because I don't know, but I understand that you were on the board previously.
Yes,
How long were you on the board previously?
about 5 years,
5 years, and how long ago was that?
about 3 years ago.
Like 3 years, okay, so right before, well, not right before James Page took over, but a couple years before James Page took over.
He was our financial chair and he was very capable. Any other discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
I can't hear, I cannot hear his words. Can you speak?
Yes,
please?
sure.
Thank you.
This is a board decision, sorry.
I said,
Just here.
I said that, previously, I had served for approximately 5 years. I was finance chair for pretty much all of those years. And, I had, left the board probably about 3 years ago.
Any other discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messimer,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langner,
Yes.
Olson.
No, but just because I think it should be somebody who's been with this current board for longer, but nothing personal.
Congratulations, Mr. Chapman, you're the board president. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I was gonna talk about that refrigerator, unless you wanted to. The fire department has a refrigerator that's no longer working, and they wanted to get rid of it. I didn't know if you as a board needed to declare that surplus before we could get rid of that.
Probably a good idea.
Ms. Fox, the board requesting an update from you.
No.
No, not yet.
Make a motion to surplus the non-working refrigerator in the fire station.
Second.
Call public works. Any more discussion?
You brought up one of those.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messimer,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langner,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Anything else? Okay, Ms. Fox.
I was,
Mr. Slater.
yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I want to let you know that the Mid-America Regional Councils, where all the funding gets started and stopped, and you got in my notes that Pleasant Valley Road is, we're still working on that, but they tried to slip something through and we got it caught. The budget last time for capital improvements, we talked about bulletproof windows. I neglected to put on there that there was also film included because I was not aware of that. I thought it was all part of one bid. But item number 2 for $24,716.31 is the additional cost for the film. Also, I received a couple of certified letters from Alderman Gallagher, which I immediately forwarded to Myrma, who came back with a letter. And first of all, thank you for getting your permit. Appreciate that. And Alderman Page, by the way, had a business and he bought his license too. So I just want to make sure the board knows that there's 10 other locations in this city that have multiple businesses in them. So they've got attorneys too. And I'm pretty comfortable with the way I interpreted the ordinance. That was with you, but Matthew Broderson, the executive director of Myrma, has some questions that's on the copy. So as soon as Alderman Gallagher gets me those answers, I will submit that to our city attorney for an answer. And if I'm wrong, I will definitely apologize, but we'll see. But if I am wrong, remember, we've got these 10, there's probably 30 businesses altogether, all said and done, like how transport has 5 businesses, and then we could go on, but, and I've got a list. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, just a question on that. Do they have separate businesses? Do they have separate LLCs? Or do they run under a single LLC as a single organization?
I would have to find that out, but what I will tell you this, I don't think our, our ordinances care about tax codes, care about limited liability. I think it just says businesses, and we keep it simple, and that's what the attorney can answer. But I need that information on those several questions that he presented, and then I'll submit it. Oh, and also, I know your attorney wrote a 3-page letter to Myrna. They didn't tell me who wrote it, that's pretty obvious. But have them look at the gross receipts part of our ordinances too, because
I'm sorry.
the gross receipts.
I did not write a 3-page letter.
Okay, well, anyway, somebody did, and it wasn't our attorneys. But there's a 40 cents per $1,000 of gross income that also is including your business licenses. That's just FYI. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Could you further explain the way that those gross receipts work for service-based businesses?
Yeah, just any revenue you get. If you get $1,000 of gross revenue, we get 40 cents.
So my understanding based off of our ordinances and confirming with our city clerk, that is not accurate. So it is based off of income generated in Pleasant Valley.
Okay.
So if you're a service-based business like I am, I do not do, I've yet to do a single wedding or photo shoot in the city of Pleasant Valley or with a resident of Pleasant Valley.
Okay.
So all of my business has been generated outside of the state of Pleasant Valley. I do weddings in Kansas City, I've done them out of state, I do them all over the place, hours away from Pleasant Valley.
I'll get that clarification also. That would be
But I just want to make
great
sure that since
question.
we're making a broad statement like that, that
No.
other businesses understand that's the way that the ordinance read and confirmation from the city clerk that it is based off of business generated within the city of Pleasant Valley.
Okay, very good. We'll confirm that. Thank you.
And then I actually have one other just comment, just so that, because this is on here, I understand that we're gonna send it to our attorney. So obviously we can get his response, but I do want to point out just the statement here where it says, any occupation license is engaged in more than one occupation and business. So I just think that that is very specific language. It doesn't say or any one occupation or business. It says occupation and business. So that does state clearly that if it is a single business, it would have to be a separate occupation and separate business, not just a separate occupation within one business.
Very good. Got highlighted. Thanks.
Anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay. Mr. Cronk, Public Works.
No, now it's Mrs. Fox.
Yeah. Well, I thought Mr. Slater took Miss Fox.
No.
No.
Okay.
All right. Most of what was on my report was informational. There was one issue about the safety coordinator. And I made 2 suggestions to the board. The board can decide whether they want to do that or not. One was just to add a single sentence into the job description of the human resource person that already does loss control, that they are the safety coordinator for the purposes of the definition that I provided you in the loss prevention manual. The job description aspect could simply be voted on by the board, doesn't require an ordinance, but the change to page 1 in the loss prevention manual would require an ordinance. I suggested to Matt that maybe, first we see whether you want to do it or not before we go to the effort of creating an ordinance. So that's to just discuss and vote on those 2 things. Does anybody have any questions about it, or?
Ms. Fox, yeah. Is the page that you provided for the loss control responsibilities, is this with the change or without the change?
That's with the change. The highlighted areas, the change that would be made.
Is it changed or is it added? Like is that entire section added?
The safety coordinator, yes.
Okay. So the original copy went straight from city administrator to department supervisors.
Right, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And it does reference to the loss prevention manual, the safety coordinator, but we didn't really have that defined.
Anybody else?
Anything else?
I make a motion that we add the safety coordinator designation and verbiage as presented by Ms. Fox to the loss control manual.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messerman,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langner,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
So that will need to be brought back in ordinance form at the next meeting. I make a motion that we add on page 2 of the human resource risk manager job description, item 1 under loss control. Human resource risk manager is a safety coordinator as described in the city's loss prevention manual.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Mary already seconded.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messerman,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langner,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Anything else? Alderman Mason?
I have a question now. Does this need to be an ordinance? There was a memo from Matthew Robertson about to suggest that the city appoint an official and alternate representative, the primary contact for Myrna. And so who is it says that is the alternate is currently vacant. Who is the primary contact person?
I think it said it was Slater.
I'm the primary, yes.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get hold of the guy from the Attorney General's office.
yeah.
And then, so, yeah, because I can't find the page on me right now, but yeah, I remember it did state,
Yeah.
each member city to appoint an official and alternate representative. So we have the primary contact as David Slater, so I guess they want us to pick somebody as a secondary contact, that way if David is not available, they have somebody else to reach out to. Would that be the correct understanding?
That's correct.
Okay. Is that supposed to just be somebody within the administration department? I would assume like that,
I think that makes the most sense.
I would assume having the city clerk in that position would probably make the most sense if it's, if,
Either that or is the human resource risk manager, they can talk to them.
Well, I don't think it's who can talk to them, it's who the primary contacts are for.
so if Myrna needs to
Talk
contact us, they contact Slater. And if Slater is unavailable, they need a secondary person to contact when he is unavailable, if he was on vacation, or if he was out of the office, for whatever reason, I would assume sick leave or something. So I would make a motion that we would make our city clerk, so currently Matthew Chapman, the alternate representative for
Enter your
Myrna.
attendee ID number, followed by pound. If you do not know your attendee number, press pound to continue.
Second.
You'll now be connected to the meeting.
Any more discussion?
Yes.
Okay, working with the Attorney General. Oh, is that just me?
Oh, is that just me?
I'm sorry.
Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Okay, excellent.
Do we need a motion to take the meeting out of, or agenda out of order?
yes.
I move that we take the agenda out of order by moving the discussion with the Attorney General to now, and pushing back the remainder of Human Resources report down to the end, until after.
Well,
Do we need to?
department heads haven't given their reports yet.
We're gonna be here until 8 o'clock.
It's either a matter of having them here or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other discussion?
Well, so we do have a motion and a second already on the floor. We do. I made a motion to appoint Matthew Chapman as the alternate representative for Murma. And then, did you second it? Okay, that's what I thought it was.
I seconded, and then Mr. Crawford has discussion.
What I would like to do is just table it for right now, because without going to say, I think it's probably need to be said in close. What I want to talk about first probably need to be done in close session.
Mr. Turner, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well. I would like to still move forward with my motion, so.
Okay. Well, I can say it here, but, I have a problem, and I don't know, and I think it can caught up, but I do have a problem. I don't think that anybody should be receiving any type of correspondence from Murma if they have any type of legal action against the city.
I don't think so either.
I mean, because Murma is part of our legal arm. So, I'm just not comfortable with that.
Mr. Mayor, can we continue this discussion after Mr. Turner? Because
that's what I was.
Please.
I think it probably should.
Could I table my motion until after the discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll table my motion until after our discussion with the Attorney General.
Mr. Turner, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, excellent. Can everybody hear me okay? Can everybody see the slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for allowing me to present here today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Jay Turner, Director of Sunshine Law Compliance with the Missouri Attorney General's Office. A little background on myself is I'm originally from Southern California. Please don't hold that against me. I grew up in San Diego. Both of my parents are retired law enforcement officers, and I myself spent most of my career as a state parole agent and a securities fraud investigator before moving to Missouri in 2015. Came to work at the Attorney General's office as working on both civil and criminal cases. In 2017, I was promoted to our public safety manager position, and the Attorney General's office is a public governmental body, just as the city of Pleasant Valley is. So we have sunshine law responsibilities. And the public safety section of our office is responsible for criminal investigations, criminal prosecutions. So my role, part of my role in that position, was to be the custodian of records. So I received sunshine law requests. I determined what was responsive, what wasn't, what was open, what was closed. So I had about 6 or 7 years of hands-on experience with the Missouri Sunshine Law before moving into my current role in February of last year. And in addition to traveling the state and giving these types of presentations, both in person and remotely, my unit is also one that investigates alleged violations of the Sunshine Law by Missouri public governmental bodies. So just wanted to give you a little introduction on myself. First things first, here, nothing in this presentation is meant to be legal advice either by myself or by the Attorney General's office. Full disclosure, I am not an attorney. My role is as an investigator in my position. The Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 27, talks about who the Attorney General's office can provide legal advice to. And by statute, we can only provide legal advice to the Department of Corrections, the Department of Mental Health, Department of Health and Senior Services, state agencies. And I like to make sure to point that out during my presentations because I know a lot of times public governmental bodies on the local level, city councils, county commissions, and even private citizens will call our office and say, is this record open or closed? Can this body close this meeting? And that's not something that our office is able to independently determine. We can conduct a review, an investigation. We can determine whether something is a likely violation or a potential violation. We can have a body go through training. But for a formal opinion about whether something is in fact a violation, it would take an opinion of a court, not our office. So this is a quote that I came across that I think sums up what the Sunshine Law stands for. Democracies die behind closed doors. When government begins closing doors, it selectively controls information rightfully belonging to the people. Selective information is misinformation. I'm sure everyone here has heard of FOIA, or the Freedom of Information Act. FOIA is actually a federal law that applies to federal government agencies. It doesn't apply to the state of Missouri. So when someone makes a records request or a FOIA request to a public governmental body in Missouri, what they are essentially making is a Missouri Sunshine Law request. I like to make sure I point out that distinction because if a body receives a public records request, even if the requester improperly references a different statute or the incorrect statute, such as FOIA, a body has to treat that records request as a public records request. We've had situations where a body has said, well, they made this records request pursuant to FOIA. FOIA doesn't apply to us, so the body didn't respond. And that's not something you could do as a public governmental body in Missouri. If you can interpret something as a records request, you have to treat it as a records request. So what exactly is the Sunshine Law? So the Sunshine Law is the public policy of the state of Missouri that all meetings, records, votes, actions, and deliberations of public governmental bodies are open to the public unless otherwise provided by law. The Sunshine Law shall be liberally construed and its exceptions strictly construed to promote this public policy. So basically what this means is all meetings, records, votes, etc. of a public governmental body are presumed to be open. They are open by default. If a body is going to close or redact meetings, records, votes, etc., you need to have a legal reason to do so, and you have to provide that reason to the requester. The takeaway from that is public business is the public's business. And you'll notice at the bottom right-hand corner, we have a legal citation and a page number. The legal citation is where you can find what we're talking about in the slide in the statute. And the page number is where you can find it in our booklet. We have a physical booklet, and we also have one online as well. They're the exact same booklet, just we have some people that prefer a physical booklet, whereas others prefer the online. It's really a personal preference. I personally like the online version because if I'm investigating a complaint and I'm trying to find keywords, I do Control F and I can look for keywords in that online document where you can't necessarily do that with a physical booklet. But I've come across public officials and private citizens that have physical booklets and they just have all these dozens of sticky notes sticking out of them, and everybody's got their own system and either are fine. Just want to let you know that we have both of those available too. So who does the Sunshine Law apply to? So it applies to Missouri public governmental bodies. And that includes municipalities such as cities and villages. It includes counties, state agencies, police departments, special districts, and committees. There was a study done a few years ago by the website governing.com that looked at public governmental bodies across the United States in relation to population. And the state of Missouri has almost as many public governmental bodies as the state of New York, and they have 3 times our population. A big reason for that is Missouri has a lot of special districts. We have ambulance districts, fire districts, library districts, taxing districts, a lot of special districts in Missouri. Sunshine Law also applies to a committee. So say the city council or a county commission creates a committee to study a particular issue. Say they create a budget committee, for example. Because that budget committee was created by that parent governmental body, that city council or that county commission, that committee, that budget committee, has Sunshine Law responsibilities as well. And we'll talk about those specific requirements further in our presentation. So I mentioned a little bit about committees, but the Sunshine Law would also apply to a subcommittee or an advisory committee. So say the city decides to create a budget committee to study the budget, but the budget committee decides, well, we want to have a subcommittee to study specific aspects of the budget. They want to create a subcommittee for parks and recreation, specifically that part of the budget, or salaries. They create a salary subcommittee. Those subcommittees, because they were created by and responsible to a parent, that parent governmental body, that committee or that city council, they also have Sunshine Law responsibilities. Sunshine Law would also apply to a situation where a public governmental body created an advisory committee. So say the city decides to create an advisory committee to study a particular issue. Say you want to build a new health department or a new police department. So you want to appoint an advisory committee comprised of private citizens to study a budget issue or a particular issue and bring it back to the city council. That advisory committee is a public governmental body because it was created by that parent governmental body being the city council or county commission. We've had situations where a public body has said, well, we created an advisory committee, but it's comprised of private citizens. It's not public officials, it's not elected officials, therefore it's not a public governmental body, and that assessment is not correct. It doesn't matter who comprises the committee. It matters who creates it and who it's responsible to. So if it's created by a public governmental body and responsible to a public governmental body, it is in itself a public governmental body. So who is not covered by the Missouri Sunshine Law? So our office receives roughly, last year received about 600 Sunshine Law complaints from across Missouri. Some of those complaints, the Sunshine Law does not apply. Some examples of that would be private entities, private organizations, Subway, Target, Walmart. Those are private businesses not subject to the Sunshine Law. Yes, we do actually get Sunshine Law complaints against Walmart. Homeowners associations and property owner associations also are not subject to the Sunshine Law. I think that people think that because those organizations have boards, they take minutes, they post notices, that they must be a public governmental body, and that's not the case. Those are private organizations. Non-Missouri governmental bodies, so this would be federal agencies or agencies based out of state. The Missouri Sunshine Law only has jurisdiction over a Missouri public governmental body. Judicial entities when not operating in an administrative capacity. We also received quite a few complaints on this particular bullet point. So the judicial entities such as the courts have Sunshine Law responsibilities just like any other public governmental body. Some of those are administrative responsibilities, budgets, salaries, organization, complaints, things like that. Those types of situations, generally speaking, the Sunshine Law would apply to those entities operating in an administrative capacity. But if the complaint or the records request are for court records, judicial records, things off of CaseNet, generally speaking, the Missouri Sunshine Law does not have jurisdiction in those types of situations. So if somebody files a records request or they want to file a complaint against the courts for not providing access to court records, that generally falls outside the scope of the Sunshine Law. The courts actually have their own rule that deals with records requests and complaints about public records requests, which is Missouri Supreme Court Rule 2. So if our office receives a complaint that has to do with judicial records, we refer those back to the courts, handled through the lens of the Missouri Supreme Court Rule 2 rather than the Missouri Sunshine Law. Nonprofit corporations. So a vast majority of nonprofit corporations are not subject to the Sunshine Law. Again, they're private organizations. There is a very narrow area of Missouri law, of the Missouri Sunshine Law, where an entity could be considered what's called a quasi-public governmental body, and quasi meaning part. Prior to 2023, there were very specific criteria that an entity had to meet in order to be considered a quasi-public governmental body. So the first benchmark that they had to meet was that they had to be organized under specific chapters of Missouri law, and that was Chapter 353, 352, 354, and 355. If the entity met that benchmark, they had to meet a second benchmark, was that those entities had to be organized specifically to enter into contracts with a Missouri public governmental body. It couldn't be an ancillary purpose or a subsidiary purpose. It had to be a primary purpose. In 2023, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Malin, M-A-L-I-N, filed a records request with an entity called the Missouri Association of Task Forces. And he made a records request to this organization, and the organization replied and says, well, we're not a public governmental body, the Sunshine Law does not apply to us. Mr. Malin disagreed, and he filed a lawsuit against this organization. When the circuit court looked at this particular entity, they reviewed not just those two benchmarks that I mentioned earlier, but additional benchmarks that the courts held that an entity had to meet in order to be considered a quasi-PGB. I think it was 5 additional. So previously there were just those 2 benchmarks. Now there were additional 5 for a total of roughly 7. The court held that that organization did not meet those 7 benchmarks and therefore was not a quasi-PGB. Mr. Malin didn't agree with that decision, so he appealed to the appellate court, and the appellate court affirmed the lower court's ruling. So I make this point because I think that a lot of entities that previously could have been considered a quasi-PGB in light of the Malin decision probably are no longer considered a quasi-PGB. If you're interested in that case, if you're a legal court case nerd like I am, Malin, M-A-L-I-N, versus the Missouri Association of Task Forces is the name of that case, both on the circuit and on the appellate level. The Sunshine Law also does not apply to most individual employees or board members. So I make this with a caveat. So the Sunshine Law says that it applies to a public governmental body for records retained by or of a public governmental body. They don't apply to your personal records, your personal bank records, as far as Sunshine Law goes. We had a individual who wanted to figure out what the salary of a presiding commissioner was in the county. But instead of sending his public records request to the county, he actually made his records request to the commissioner directly and wanted the commissioner's personal bank records. Obviously, the commissioner's personal bank records are not retained by the public body, so we were able to close that complaint. However, an interesting part of the Sunshine Laws, we'll talk about Chapter 610.021, which is the chapter of the Sunshine Law that contains exceptions for when a public body can close meetings, records, etc. And in that 610.021, there's a subsection, and it's subsection 13, that deals with the personnel records of a public governmental body. So theoretically, a public governmental body can close the personnel records of employees within their organization. However, under that subsection, there are 4 things that the body cannot close under the Sunshine Law. And that is the name, title, length of service, and salary of members of a public governmental body. So while a body can close records associated with their personnel records, they can't close records associated with those 4 things. So if that member of the public had submitted his records request to the county custodian of records and requested that presiding commissioner's salary, that's something that that body could not close under the Sunshine Law. So section 610.028 is the section of the Sunshine Law that requires every public governmental body in Missouri to have a policy in place that is open to the inspection regarding the release of any information on any meeting, record, or vote. So if you're a public governmental body in Missouri, you have to have a Sunshine Law policy, and you have to have a custodian of records named by law. Sunshine Law policy can be as detailed as you want it to be. So our office actually recommends that you include information on how your meetings are held. So if your meetings are held on a certain day at a certain time, we recommend you include that in your policy. We recommend you include procedures for searching and producing records. Every public governmental body is different as far as how they go about looking for records and getting records gathered pursuant to a records request. Include those procedures in your policy as well. It's much more transparent for members of the public if they know what your procedures are. That way they're not constantly calling your office trying to figure out where you are in the process. If you lay that out initially to members of the public, it's a lot clearer and much more transparent. If you charge fees, fees are contained in 610.026, and it's very specific about what you can charge for a records request. But some organizations choose not to charge. Some organizations choose to charge less than the Sunshine Law allows. So if you do that, we recommend you including that in your policy as well. We also recommend that you include who your Sunshine Law policy applies to. This generally becomes an issue in larger organizations such as the City of Kansas City, City of St. Louis, where you might have multiple Sunshine Law policies. You'll have one that applies to the city clerk. You'll have a separate one for the police department. You'll have a separate one for the health department. Whereas in smaller jurisdictions, you may have one Sunshine Law policy that applies to all organizations within the city. So if you specify in your policy who your policy applies to, again, much more transparent for members of the public. Okay, let's talk a little bit about public meetings. So the Sunshine Law defines a public meeting as any meeting of a quorum of a public governmental body that is subject to the Sunshine Law, at which public business is discussed, decided, or public policy formulated. And those meetings can take place in person, they can take place electronically via email or text, they can take place via conference call, and they can also take place on an online chat or message boards such as Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams. There is a misconception, not just by public governmental bodies, but by members of the public, that if a body gets together with its quorum and they discuss public business, but they don't take any votes, that that's not considered a public meeting, and that's not correct. What constitutes a public meeting is, number one, a quorum is present, And number two, public business is discussed, decided, or public policy formulated. So those two things are present. Generally speaking, it is considered a public meeting under the Sunshine Law. The term shall also include a public vote of all or a majority of members of a PGB by electronic communication or other means conducted in lieu of holding an in-person meeting. I put this slide in here because I was training a body in the southern part of the state that I work in. And in this situation, they had said, well, sometimes we're getting together, for a meeting, and the clerk has gathered up all the information. We were reviewing it in our meeting, and we realized that we don't have everything that we need. So we have to table that issue and move that meeting down the road. Later on, the clerk will gather up the additional information. She'll email it to us individually as board members. We'll review it on our own, and then we will email our vote to the clerk. And I said, that is likely a violation of the Sunshine Law, because while you're giving members of the public the opportunity to participate in the discussion, you're not giving them the opportunity to participate in the vote. So in that type of situation, your best practice would be to post notice of another public meeting to give the public the opportunity to come back and participate in that in-person meeting for the vote. So what is not considered a public meeting? So the term public meeting shall not include an informal gathering of members of a PGB for ministerial or social purposes when there is no intent to avoid the purposes of this chapter. So this comes out of this court case, Colombo v. Buford, where a body had gotten together for a social event. I believe it was for a Christmas party. And during this Christmas party, there just happened to be a quorum present of their board. And there was a spontaneous discussion that came up. I think it was about employee morale. What can we do to improve the morale of employees within our organization? They were throwing ideas back and forth. Members of the public joined in on the discussion. And later on, somebody found out about this and said, well, this was a public meeting. There was no notice posted 24 hours in advance. There was no tentative agenda. And when the court looked at that particular gathering, they noted that all 5 of these bullet points were not present. It was a totally unstructured event with no agenda. Nothing was gavelled into order. People didn't take turns talking to the entire group. There were no trappings of what could be considered an official meeting. However, the court was very careful to note that if any one of these 5 bullet points had not been present, or if that body had gotten together under the guise of a Christmas party but really intended to surreptitiously hold a meeting, that could have been held to be a violation of the Sunshine Law, but it wasn't. It was a Christmas party. So I do like to remind public bodies that, again, there is a misconception that anytime your quorum gets together, you all decide to go out to Applebee's or go have dinner together or go to a barbecue, that constitutes a public meeting. That's not the case. The 2 things that constitute that meeting are the quorum, and you discuss, decide, or formulate public business is what makes it a public meeting. So try to avoid, if you happen to be together with your quorum in a social event or something that hasn't been a noticed public meeting, avoid discussing any type of public business, because while you might not intend to violate the Sunshine Law, it may be interpreted that way by members of the public. So types of public meetings. So the Sunshine Law defines 2 different types of public meetings, open and closed. Back in my home state of California, we refer to closed meetings as executive session. I've noticed some bodies will have special sessions or work sessions, and that's totally fine if you want to have those meetings with those special designations. But just make sure to preface each one of those sessions by whether it's an open session or a closed session. So it's an open special session. It's a closed work session. And that's helpful for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's helpful for members of the public to know, because they might not be able to attend a closed meeting, depending on the nature of it. It's helpful for you as a body to know what you can and can't discuss, because the rules are different depending on whether it's an open meeting or closed meeting. And if our office is looking into a complaint, it's helpful for us to be able to determine if it's an open meeting or a closed meeting, because the rules are different depending on what type of meeting that it is. So it's much more transparent for everybody involved. So if you do have a public meeting, you must post a notice with the time, the date, the place, and a tentative agenda. And the statute specifically says a tentative agenda that is reasonably calculated to advise members of the public of the matters to be considered. So if you have something that you even reasonably anticipate may pop up in a meeting and you're going to want to discuss it, make sure to include it on your tentative agenda. If you end up not discussing it in your meeting, but you posted it on your tentative agenda, there's really no harm, no foul. But the danger comes in when something comes up in a meeting, it's not on your tentative agenda, and the body then discusses it at length, then you kind of wade into that gray area as far as tentative agendas go. And if that meeting is being conducted by telephone or electronic means, you have to provide a manner in which the public can observe that meeting. So if it's a conference call, a call-in number. If it's a Zoom or WebEx, other type of electronic meeting, a way for the public to link into that meeting. So if it's an in-person meeting, only those first 4 bullet points are required: time, date, place, and tentative agenda. But if it's a telephone or a remote meeting, all 5 of those bullet points are required. And that notice that we talked about on the previous slide must be posted at least 24 hours in advance of all public meetings, both open and closed. It must be posted in a prominent place that's easily accessible to the public. And weekends and holidays do not count towards that 24-hour period. So say, for example, if your meeting is being conducted on Tuesday at 5 p.m. and the Monday before is a holiday, you would need to make sure that you posted that notice with its tentative agenda no later than 5 p.m. on that preceding Friday. The Sunshine Law also requires that you hold that meeting at a place that is reasonably accessible to the public, and it has to be at a place that is of sufficient size to accommodate the anticipated attendance. So again, if you have something on your tentative agenda that you reasonably think might draw a lot of people, make arrangements to hold it at a larger location just in case. If you don't end up needing that space, there's no harm, no foul. But if you do have something on your agenda that you should have anticipated was going to be hot button or is going to draw a lot of people, and you don't make those arrangements beforehand, that's when you kind of wade into that gray area when it comes to the Sunshine Law. So we call the things that we just talked about the normal requirements for the Sunshine Law. So posted 24 hours in advance, prominent place that's easily accessible to the public, at least 24 hours in advance, a place that's reasonably accessible to the public, and a place that is of sufficient size to accommodate the anticipated attendance. Those are the normal requirements of the Sunshine Law. However, there may be times that come up when you have to have a meeting that falls outside those normal requirements. So a meeting held in less than 24 hours notice, a place that's not reasonably accessible to the public, etc. If you do have a situation that pops up that falls outside those normal requirements, the Sunshine Law has provisions that you need to follow in regard to the Sunshine Law. And that's contained in 610.020 subsection 4. And that's what we call the emergency or short notice exception. So if you have to have a meeting that falls outside those normal requirements, you still need to post as soon as practical, and you need to state in your minutes the reason why that meeting is being held outside the normal requirements. So a good litmus test for when that actually happens is, an issue comes up and hey, we might have to hold this meeting in less than 24 hours or a place that's not reasonably accessible to the public, etc. A good litmus test is to look at the issue and say, can this issue wait 24 hours in order to be in compliance with the statute? If it can, best practice is to do so that it falls within the normal requirements. But if it doesn't, it's like, nope, we can't wait, this needs to be discussed. You do need to still post as soon as practical for that meeting, and you need to explain in the minutes why that meeting is taking place on an emergency or short notice. Some examples that I give on situations where a meeting might fall into those emergency or short notice requirements would be, say, for example, there was a flood at City Hall, and you guys had public records that were in danger of being damaged, and you need to make a decision on where to move those records to. Or say flood at City Hall did flood, and you guys were having your normal city council meetings, but you couldn't have it there. It needed to be somewhere else other than City Hall. You need to state that reason in the minutes. If there was a grant deadline that was getting ready to expire, nobody was aware of that grant deadline beforehand, and you need to make a decision on where those funds were going to go to, or you were going to lose those grant funds. Another situation where you could possibly fall into that emergency or short notice exception. Again, the best litmus test is just to look at the issue and decide, can this wait 24 hours? If it can, best practice is to do so. But if it can't, you do need to follow the guidelines that are contained in that 610.020 subsection 4 for emergency things that fall outside the normal requirements. So I mentioned that your tentative agendas must be reasonably calculated to advise members of the public of the matters to be considered. Unfortunately, in the 51 years now the Sunshine Law was originally passed in 1973, there haven't been any court cases that have further defined how much detail has to be in a tentative agenda. Like I said, right now it's just reasonably calculated. There is currently a case pending for the Western District Court of Appeals that has to do with a fire protection district in the Kansas City area regarding tentative agendas. Our office is actually not a party to that lawsuit. However, we did write an amicus brief encouraging the court to define in more detail what has to be in a tentative agenda. Because I will say, we do get a lot of complaints on tentative agendas, and unfortunately, because it says just reasonably calculated, sometimes that's hard to prove one way or the other. So we recommend you just be as detailed as possible, and if something is potentially, you think it might pop up, put it on your tentative agenda just to be safe. So on our left side here, we have our potentially insufficient agenda versus the right side, which is likely sufficient. And again, we use those terms as potentially or likely because it's a court that can make the determination of a violation. We can make the potentially or likely, but that's about as far as our office can go. So under our unfinished business, we have budgets and park permits. Two things that seem pretty innocuous. It's probably not going to draw a lot of people. However, if that budget has to do with funding for your police department, and those park permits have to do with a New Year's Eve fireworks display where people have children and animals at home, it's probably going to draw a lot more people than your tentative agenda on the left. The one on the left is not necessarily a violation, but you cut down the potential for complaints or misinterpretations or misunderstandings if you just be as detailed as possible in your tentative agenda. So as far as tentative agendas go to, I do want to point out that there is, again, not going to name the city, there is a city in the southern part of the state that was preparing their tentative agendas. And you'll notice on our left side under unfinished business, we have two subtopics, and we list that as potentially insufficient. This particular public body was putting unfinished business on its agenda, but they weren't listing any subtopics, and they were using unfinished business to discuss anything they ever discussed in a meeting prior to, regardless of how far back those discussions went. And an example of that was in August of 2023, they had funding for their police department on their tentative agenda. Had no discussions whatsoever until October of this year, so more than a year later. And on their tentative agenda, they put unfinished business, but they didn't put police department, they didn't put funding, they didn't put budget. So if you're a member of your community who cares about police funding, how are you supposed to know that your local public government body is going to be discussing police funding or funding of any kind for your police department? So in that situation, we did hold that was a potentially insufficient agenda, and that body actually went through sunshine law training to kind of correct that violation. I will tell you, I've been doing this job for almost 2 years, and I will tell you that a vast majority of potential sunshine law violations, I won't say all, but I would say a vast majority, are simply from lack of knowledge. The sunshine law is 50 plus years old. The provisions are sometimes not clear on a certain area. Some people just don't know what the sunshine law says about certain things, or they've been doing something a certain way. I had a city that was, when I was reviewing the city clerk custodian's records, that they've been doing something a particular way for 20 plus years, and it was incorrect. It was the wrong way to do it. And the clerk was like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never had an issue. So sometimes, again, it's just lack of understanding. It's not necessarily knowing or purposeful. And those are the two terms that the Sunshine Law defines for defining a violation of the Sunshine Law: a knowing violation and or a purposeful violation. So in order for a violation to occur, the court has to hold that one or both of those have occurred. Recording public meetings. The body shall allow members of the public to record all open public meetings, both audio and the body is allowed to establish guidelines regarding the recording process. You don't want somebody walking up and sticking a cell phone or a camera in a board member or commissioner's face. So you can establish reasonable guidelines regarding that recording process, but you can't prohibit members of the public from recording. There also is no requirement that members of the public notify you that they're going to be recording an open public meeting. So they don't have to notify you in advance. One question I did get recently is, well, what if our body records public meetings live on YouTube and it's recorded so people can go back and watch it later as well? As a matter of public service, as a matter of transparency, we recommend that you do that. But even in those situations, you still can't prohibit members of the public from recording. The right to record meetings is only for open public meetings. The right to record does not extend into closed meetings. If a body is going to record its closed meeting, they need to have the permission of the public body. I know some public bodies like to record their meetings, either video or audio, both for minutes or for posterity. And so if you're going to do that, we recommend that you take a vote on the record to specify who's going to be recording and by what method they're going to be recording. That way it's encapsulated in your minutes and it's not something that you need to worry about later on that recording was authorized. Best practices for all public meeting notices. Make sure you post those meeting notices with its tentative agenda in an area that is easily accessible to the public. That includes ADA requirements. And it's accessible to the public after business hours. And consider posting more than one physical posting. So for all meetings, regardless of what kind of meeting it is, it's in person, it's a conference call, it's a remote meeting, you need to post physically. And the statute says your principal place of business. So if you're a city, city hall. If you're a county commission. You can certainly post more than one physical notice, but one physical notice is always required. It has to be accessible to the public even after business hours. So if you're posting it on an interior door where the city hall or the county commission headquarters are locked after hours and the public doesn't have access to that, to be able to see that, it's generally not in compliance with the statute. And notices and tentative agendas, the notices and tentative agendas can be one document or they can be two separate documents, but they do need to be posted together. If you're having your meeting online, so it's a WebEx, it's a Zoom, you not only have that physical posting requirement, but you also have to post online. And the statute specifically says your website. If you don't have a website, you can always do Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatnot. But you do need to post online as well if you're having a remote meeting. So there's two posting requirements for an online meeting. If you don't have a website, but you do have a Facebook page, then that is a acceptable alternative as long as it's posted remotely in some fashion. Include the date and time the notice and the agenda was posted. So in the bottom left-hand corner, or the bottom right-hand corner, make sure you just note by hand the date and time that it was posted and by whom. I know a lot of times when I'll print off, a letter or something to be mailed, I'll print it off today, but I won't actually physically put it in the mail until tomorrow. And that's helpful to do for your notices and tentative agendas because you have that 24-hour requirement. And we have actually received sunshine law complaints where the notice and the tentative agenda has been posted 23 hours and 56 minutes before the start of the meeting. It seems very petty, very small, but technically that is a likely violation of the statute. So that's why if you just note by hand the time, date, and the person who posted it, it saves yourself a lot of trouble. Plus, you're not trying to remember 6 months down the road if somebody requests those records. Did I post it? Did somebody else post it? What time did I post it? It's just handwritten on that document. Include the name and contact information for your custodian of records. So on your notice, your tentative agenda, put the contact information for your custodian. And that's helpful because it cuts down on somebody calling, like, hey, I'm trying to get access to records. Do I need to call you? Who else do I call? If you have the contact information on that notice or tentative agenda, it's very clear, very transparent, so it cuts down on confusion and misconceptions. And just be very specific as possible when drafting your tentative agenda items. You'll notice this several times in our presentation, just because we do get so many complaints on tentative agendas, but unfortunately there's not a lot we can do with it just because the statute is so vague and there hasn't been that clarification from the courts. So meeting minutes. So if you have a meeting, either open or closed, it is required that you take minutes of that. You must include the date, the time, the place or location of that meeting, members present and members absent. This doesn't refer to everybody attending the meeting, it just refers to the members of the board or the committee where the minutes are being taken. So they have to be listed by name. So Tom Miller, present. Jan Miller, absent. You can't just say 5 present, 4 absent, you actually list them by name. A record of all votes taken. Every vote in every meeting, open or closed, must be recorded. Roll call votes must specify each individual member's vote. So if you're voting in a closed meeting, you're required to do it by roll call. So again, John Smith voted yes, Tammy Miller voted no. Or you're listing by name everybody who voted yes, and by name everybody who voted no. As long as members of the public can ascertain who voted what way, then you're generally fine as far as the statute goes. We also recommend that you do roll call votes for open meetings, but it's not required for open meetings, it's only required for closed meetings. If you are taking minutes from your closed meeting, you have to state the specific subsection of 610.021. It's 26 reasons why you can close a meeting. And if applicable, the good cost to hold that meeting on less than 24 hours. We talked about meetings that fall outside the normal requirements. So just make sure that you, if your meeting takes place outside those normal requirements, you state in the minutes why it's taking place outside those requirements. And just with our tentative agenda, just be as narrative and as detailed as possible with the topics that you discuss. Cuts down on ambiguity or misunderstandings if you just use as much detail as you can. Closed meetings are usually permissive. They are rarely mandatory. There are some situations where closing a meeting is required by law. Generally speaking, that has to do with speaking to your legal counsel when they're giving you legal advice. And mostly in all other situations, a body is authorized to close meetings, records, etc. But if you do, it must be because one of those 26 reasons under 610.021, and you do have to state those reasons. We will talk about some of those in the, I think it's the next slide coming up, what some of those 26 reasons are. Remember that it's not just a best practice, it is a requirement that all public business must remain open unless it is specifically authorized to be closed. Remember, everything is open by default. Liability most often happens for improper closure, not for over disclosure. So chances are you're going to get in trouble for closing something you shouldn't, as opposed to opening something that you're not really sure about. So I mentioned that there are 26 reasons for closing meetings, records, etc. These are some of the most commonly used subsections for closing meetings, records, etc. And you'll notice that some of these have asterisks next to them. We call that an evidence-based cutoff. So say, for example, a public body decides to take sealed bids to purchase a piece of land to build a new health department, a new police department. So they take those bids in closed session. Once those winning bids have been unsealed, the winning bid has been selected, land's been purchased, construction's been complete, all the legal requirements for that endeavor are done. Chances are the ones with the asterisk, those records are then going to become an open record at that point. And that's a situation where you're going to want to reach out to your legal counsel and say, hey, we had this situation where we had these closed meetings, records. That process is now done. Somebody's made a request for these records. Are these records now open under the Sunshine Law? Your attorney is going to help you make that determination. Not a determination our office can make independently. Subsection 3, hiring, firing, disciplining, and promoting. So this is when a body is taking action against a specific employee. You're firing your public works person. You're hiring a new clerk. This provision couldn't be used to say, oh, we're deciding budget issues for our employees and trying to determine what salaries are. That this subsection couldn't be used to close records pursuant to that, for example. I mentioned personnel records, that personnel records of the public body can be closed except for the name, title, salary, and length of service. Subsection 14, prohibited from disclosure by law. I call this one the catch-all, because while we have these 26 reasons under 610.021 to close meetings, records, etc., there may be other laws that exist outside the Sunshine Law that either require or authorize a body to close its meetings or records. And one example of that would be HIPAA. HIPAA protects the confidentiality of medical records. Missouri has laws in the books that protect the confidentiality of juvenile information. We have laws that protect sexual assault victims. There's federal laws that deal with copyright protections. So if you're citing a section of 610.021 to close a meeting or a record, you cite the subsection that authorizes that to be closed. But if you're citing a law that exists outside the Sunshine Law, you have two citation requirements. You have to cite subsection 14, and then you have to state what law it is that authorizes you or requires you to close those meetings, records, etc. So the statute talks about two different methods for closing a public meeting. A public governmental body may vote by an affirmative public vote of a majority of its quorum to close a meeting. So this is talking about you're in your open meeting and you're leaving your open meeting going into your closed meeting. You have to take that affirmative public vote on the record in order to do that. I did get a question recently about, well, does that take 2 votes or 1 vote? What if we vote to leave our open meeting and a second vote to go into our closed meeting? Another body said, well, we just take 1 vote to accomplish both, to leave the open meeting, go into the closed meeting. That's up to you as a body. As long as there is at least 1 affirmative public vote to go into your closed meeting, then you're generally in compliance with the statute. The second bullet point here, a public governmental body may give notice of its intention to hold a closed meeting and cite the specific exception from 610-021. So say you're going to have a closed meeting and you're not going to have an open meeting beforehand. You still need to post notice of that meeting 24 hours in advance with your tentative agenda, and you need to state the specific subsection or multiple subsections that allow you to close that meeting. You can't just state this meeting is closed pursuant to 610-021. You do need to state a specific subsection, one of those 25 reasons that authorize you to close that meeting. And only close a portion of the facility used for closing the meeting, and only discuss the business that is necessary that justifies that meeting's closure. We've come across court cases where a body has gone into a closed meeting and there's 35 or 40 minutes of personal discussions that have nothing to do with the reason for closing the meeting. And sometimes those portions of those closed meetings get opened by the courts because they have nothing to do with the reason that body closed the meeting to begin with. Okay, let's move into some public records. So the Sunshine Law defines a public record as any record, whether written or electronically stored, that is retained by or of any public governmental body. And the courts have construed records very broadly. It can be written records on paper, it could be electronic records on email, it could be items held on a thumb or a flash drive, and it can even be older forms of records, such as VHS tapes, cassette tapes, even those old little mini cassette tapes they used to use way back in the day. All of those, if they are retained by or of a public governmental body, are generally considered to be a public record. So what records must be retained? Records retention is actually a separate section of the Missouri Revised Statutes from the Sunshine Law. So if your question is, do I have to keep this record? And if so, how long do I have to keep this record? That's not a Sunshine Law question. That's a records retention question. And those can only be answered by the Missouri Secretary of State. They're the ones that have jurisdiction over Chapter 109. So if your question is, do I have to keep this record? If so, how long do I have to keep it? You're going to want to speak to the Secretary of State. They actually have the records retention schedules all online. They break it down by city clerk, police department, water district, sewer district, etc. If your question is this record open or closed, or is this meeting open or closed? That's a Sunshine Law question. Electronic transmission of public records. Always remember that as a general rule of public records, any record, whether written or electronically stored, that is retained by or of a public governmental body is generally considered a public record. So say I send an email from my government email to your government email, and I say, hey, I'm running out to Subway to grab a sandwich. Do you want something? That email has nothing to do with public business, but because it is retained by the public body, either mine or yours, and somebody made a request for that email, we would either have to turn it over or state why it was closed. Also remember that under 610-025, that an electronic record may be considered a public record if it's sent to a quorum of officials, which includes the sender, and it relates to public business. So if the board is sending emails back and forth to each other and a quorum is present on that email chain and you're discussing public business, this is when you're required to keep those electronic records. We generally have, I usually like to emphasize this, particularly with smaller public bodies that don't have a .gov or a city email address. They only have a Gmail or a Hotmail. If you do happen to receive emails on your personal email or your personal phone that deal with a public function or public business, best practice is that you send it to your government issued email or your custodian of records. That way it's off your personal device and you don't need to worry about it anymore. So far, there haven't been any court cases that have held that records on a personal device or a personal email are in fact public records, but it is still happening so frequently in Missouri that eventually the courts will decide whether or not a document I have on my personal cell phone that is a public document is accessible to the government. And you don't want to be a public governmental body that is the first body that court ruling or that future lawsuit is held against. So again, if you happen to get an email on your personal device or your personal email, best practice, send it to your custodian. That way it's off your phone and you don't need to worry about it. So submitting an open records request. So the Sunshine Law says that a requester, well, it doesn't say, there's actually no submission method that is required. So that means that a requester can submit an open records request a variety of ways. They can do it by letter, they can do it by email, they can do it by phone call, or they can do it in person. You can request that the public use your form, but you can't require them to use your form. But one thing that I will tell you, having done sunshine law requests for as many years as I have, what's very helpful is if you have somebody that doesn't want to put their request in writing, try to communicate to them why it's important that they do so, that it doesn't just benefit you as a public body, but it also benefits the requester. And for example, I'll get a phone call from somebody that says, I put my records request in with this public body 3 weeks ago, nobody's gotten back to me, nobody's responded. They'll say, I did this over the phone, and they give me the information of who they allegedly talked to. I'll call that person tells me, I have no idea who that person is, I've never talked to him in my life. It becomes a he said, she said kind of situation. So if you can do that where it's, you explain to the requester why it benefits them, generally you can gain compliance that way. A public governmental body must act on the request as soon as possible, but no later than 3 business days after the custodian receives it. So say, for example, you receive a records request on Friday at 4 p.m. and you went home at 3 p.m. on Friday, you're the custodian of records. So you come in on Monday morning, you get your coffee, it's about 10 o'clock before you open that email and you see that records request. A lot of different opinions on when that 3 days actually starts. However, it is actually that 3 days, that first day of that 3-day requirement starts on Tuesday, because you opened that email and saw that request on Monday, and the statute says the first day, the end of day, the first day following the receipt, which would have been Tuesday. So you would need to provide a response to the requester, either provide the records or give them some type of response saying when they can expect those records, no later than Thursday at 5 p.m. or close of business. And that actually comes out of this first court case here, Starr versus the Jackson County prosecutor. Address your request to the custodian of records by name or by title. And in this case, somebody had submitted a records request with the Jackson County prosecutor. And the prosecutor's office was actually responding to the request, they were actually providing the records, but at some point something fell through the cracks. And the body did not provide all the records that were requested, so the individual filed a lawsuit. And when the court looked at that particular records request, they noted that the Jackson County prosecutor had named herself as the custodian. And she never actually saw the records request until the lawsuit was filed. So the courts held that that records request was not properly received by the custodian of records. So bodies obviously shouldn't be using this as a way to get around or circumvent responding to the sunshine law, but it does give you a little bit of leeway. So if you are the custodian and you're going to be out of the office for more than a day or so, it's best practice to have a backup custodian or a deputy custodian named. What you don't want to do is get into a situation where you're out of the office for a week or more and you have sunshine requests piling up. That's just not a good practice. So if you're out of the office for more than a day or so, have a deputy custodian appointed to be able to fulfill those sunshine law requests. Phrase the request with specificity using language that a reasonably competent custodian of records would understand. We don't expect you guys to be mind readers. We don't expect you to be clairvoyant. You have to reasonably understand what is being requested or provide records pursuant to a records request. Give me all your emails. Very broad. There's no date ranges. There's no names and titles of employees. There's no topics. So we recommend if you get an overly broad request such as that, try to narrow it down. Engage with the requester to figure out what exactly they're looking for. Hey, give me date ranges. Give me names and titles of employees or topics of documents. And that's good for a couple of reasons. Number one, you might not have to be searching for documents that the person may not want, so it saves you work on your end. If you charge for records, the requester may be paying for records that they don't want. And if our office is looking into a complaint and we can see that the public body is engaging with the requester, trying to narrow it down, doing the due diligence, that goes a long way to resolving the complaint. We've had situations where a body has said, well, we didn't know what they were requesting, so we didn't respond. And that's not something that you can do as a public body. Requested format. If the person requests access in a particular format and the body is capable of fulfilling those records in that format, you do have to provide the records in the format the person requests, if you're capable of doing so. But this is also a situation you can use to explain to the requester how it's beneficial to them to receive records in a particular way. And that example I gave, give me all your emails, was actually a request that I had received in the AG's office. and I reached out to the requester, we narrowed it down, I got some date ranges. At the end of the day, it was still at 6,000 emails, this person. And this person wanted these 6,000 emails printed. I said, I can give these to you electronically. Nope, I want them printed. Okay, so our IT people were able to narrow down the emails. It was reviewed for privilege, but before we produced them, we calculated what it would cost to provide them in physical format. So that's 10 cents per page, and the time that our custodian was sitting there waiting for things to print out. Or we could go out and buy a $15 thumb drive, upload it to a thumb drive, and provide the records to the requester that way. The requester did it at going with the electronic version. But at the end of the day, if the requester was willing to pay for those records to be in physical format, then we would have had to provide those to them. Fortunately, they didn't, because that was a very, very big production. Public governmental bodies must act on the request as soon as possible, no later than 3 business days after the custodian receives it. So you get that request. If you can't provide those records within those 3 days, you have to give the requester a detailed explanation of why, and you have to give them a place and earliest time and date that those records will be available for inspection. So you can't just say your records will be ready on Thursday or a week from Friday. You actually have to give them a hard, fast date and time. So your records will be available on Friday, December 27th at 3 p.m. You can always extend that deadline out if there's a reasonable cause for delay, which you have to explain to the requester, but you do have to give them that hard, fast date and time. And that requirement for hard, fast date and time was actually established in the lawsuit Gross v. Parson that was filed against the governor's office, and that was decided a few years back. Make sure you address any fee estimates in your initial response letter. That way the requester knows approximately how much they're going to be paying for those records. And try to do your initial search so you can figure out approximately how many records are going to be responsive, and you can identify that to the requester. So again, so you'll be as accurate as possible as far as what that's going to cost the requester. All employees should know the identity of your custodian of records. If you are not the custodian and you happen to receive a records request, best practices is to forward that records request to the custodian and include the requester on that. That way your custodian's on that email chain, the requester's on that email chain, and you're on that email chain, so everybody's on the same page. We always recommend that you do everything in writing, that way there's actually a paper trail. Note the day the initial 3-day response went out. So this, you're doing something similar to the your notices where you're writing by hand the actual date that was posted. Here you're writing the actual date that you sending out that initial 3-day response. And again, that's helpful to be able to show that you comply within that 3-day response that the statute requires. Confirm the body's understanding of what is being requested and try and clarify with the requester. So you're just basically trying to streamline everything and make sure everything's clear on both ends, if there's not any misinterpretations or misunderstandings by the requester or by you as the custodian. Confirm the way the records will be produced. You don't want to get into a situation where the person says, well, I wanted these records electronically and now you produce them physically for me. You establish that on the back end, it's a lot more helpful to you as the custodian. And again, be very specific when explaining why those records can't be provided within those 3 business days. If there are no records responsive to a request, the body still needs to let the requester know. We've had situations where the body has said, well, there were no records responsive, so we just ignored the request. That's not something that you can do as a public body. You do need to provide them a written request. Redact whenever possible instead of closing an entire record. So the 610.024 of the Sunshine Law actually requires that if there is a record that contains both exempt and non-exempt information, you can remove the non-exempt or the exempt information, but you do have to provide the remainder of the information to the requester. So basically, if there's a page that just has a social security number that needs to be redacted, don't withhold the entire document when it's just that social security number that you need to redact. The Sunshine Law does not require a public body to create a new record upon request, but only to provide access to existing records that are held or maintained by the body. So you don't have to create a new record pursuant to a records request. I'll give you an example. Say the city decides to hold a Christmas party or a holiday party, so you rent out the community center. And people are coming and going, elected officials, staff members, members of the public, and then a few days later you get a request for the sign-in sheet for that event. Well, if you didn't keep a sign-in sheet, you don't have to go back and recreate it pursuant to a records request. If you did keep a sign-in sheet and it was retained by the body, then it would be considered a public record and you would have to provide it. But if you didn't already do that on the onset, you don't have to go back and recreate that record. The same provisions of 610.021 that apply to closed records also apply to closed meetings. So again, if you're going to close or redact something, it has to be because of one of those 26 reasons under 610.021 or a law that exists outside the Sunshine Law authorize or require those records to be closed. Make sure you provide a detailed explanation on the reason why those records are closed. Redact whenever possible instead of withholding the entire record. And best practice is when you're closing or redacting records to provide the requester with the specific subsection, specific law that authorize you to redact or withhold those records. And the reason for that is, say you close or redact records and you say, well, these records are closed pursuant to 610.021 and you don't state a subsection. If the requester comes back and says, well, you didn't state a subsection, you need to provide that information to me, the person is correct. So under 610.023.4, you now have a new 3-day response time to provide that information to them. So if you just provide the specific subsection, specific law that authorizes you to close those meetings and records in that final response letter, you just save yourself from another 3-day response. Okay, some final thoughts. When in doubt, a public meeting or record should be open to the public. Remember, everything is open by default. You need a legal reason to close it. The Sunshine Law applies to all records, regardless of what form those records are kept in, and all meetings, regardless of the manner in which those meetings are held. The Sunshine Law allows a public body to close meetings and records in some limited circumstances, but it almost never requires a public body to do so. Except in emergency situations, a public body must give at least 24 hours notice before holding a public meeting. If the meeting will be closed to the public, the notice must state the specific provision within 610.021 that authorized that meeting to be closed. Each public body must have a written Sunshine Law policy and a custodian of records named by law. That custodian's name and the Sunshine Law policy must be available to the public upon request. The Sunshine Law requires a custodian to respond to a records request as soon as possible, no later than 3 business days after the custodian receives it. Remember that just because it was sent doesn't mean it was received by the custodian. When responding to a request for copies of its records, the Sunshine Law limits how much the body can charge per page and per hour for copying and research fees. Those provisions, I think I mentioned this earlier, are contained in 610.026. You can charge up to 10 cents per page for paper copies, and the lowest salary of a member of that public governmental body for your copying and your research fees. There are specific provisions governing access to law enforcement and judicial records. The judicial records are that Missouri Supreme Court Rule 2, and law enforcement records are contained specifically in 610.100, and that deals with, if something's under a criminal investigation, if it's being prosecuted, if the case has been dismissed. It's a very specific chapter of different sections that deal with those types of records. The Sunshine Law allows for open public meetings to be both audio and video recorded by attendees. Each public governmental body may set up guidelines regarding the recording process, and these guidelines should be included in the body's Sunshine Law policy. Remember that no one is allowed to record a closed meeting unless they are given permission to do so. The Sunshine Law deals with whether a public body's records must be open to the public, but it generally does not state what records the body must keep or for how long. That is a records retention question, and for that, you're going to want to talk to the Secretary of State. I won't go through every section of these, but basically, our office is not the only office that is responsible for Sunshine Law compliance and enforcement. The Missouri State Auditor is as well. And so when they go out and do their audits of local public governmental bodies, they do a Sunshine Law audit, and they try to identify potential violations with that particular public governmental body. These are some of the most common violations they found statewide. So we try to incorporate all of these into our presentation to try and cut down on the potential for those possible violations. And that concludes our presentation. Do we have any questions?
Can you hear me? No. Sorry.
That's okay.
Can we get a copy of this presentation sent to us?
Those laws.
Absolutely. I will email a copy of this presentation to Mr. Slater.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. If you have any follow-up questions, my contact information is here. Feel free to call or send an email, and I will respond. I'm currently home in California right now, working, dealing with some family stuff. So I'm working only part-time, but I try to check my email at least once a day to try and respond to those emails several times a week. So feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. And I will send this presentation right after I'm done here, so that Mr. Slater has it to distribute to everybody there in attendance. And it's a public record, there's nothing closed in it, so if anybody requests a copy of this, feel free to give them a copy.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
All right. All right, well, thank you all, I appreciate it, and everybody have a good night, and if I don't talk to you, have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas.
Mr. Mayor.
Christmas.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Turner. Okay, good. I just want to make sure that the folks in the room know, because if you got our original agenda, I changed it Saturday night, and obviously it was more than 24 hours, so it was weekend time. But there were 4 things left on, and just to be totally transparent, that was that the mayor requested that Alderman Page be accepted as his resignation, and that Alderman Crawford be there for your vote. Mr. Turner was not on the agenda, and neither was old business, so we put those on, posted it Saturday, probably about 6:15. I sent out to department heads at that time, so if you didn't get it, but that's why if you got an agenda, it's not following along. Thank you.
He does. He does. Okay, let's get back to the meeting. Anybody want to take a quick break?
Yes.
I make a motion that we take a 10-minute break.
Second.
So it's 7:06
Oh, that
or
should be plugged in.
7:16.
It doesn't reach.
All right, go ahead, pick what you.
We should vote.
We should vote.
Wait,
Yeah,
vote, no.
Make a motion.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Bessemer,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes. Go.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. To take a break, yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss.
Yes, sir.
Langer.
Yes.
Olson.
Yes. We should have. We did send it home.
They brought that up to me. There's also training available in the regional council to certain municipal.
I will apologize.
A lot of them have taken. Okay. Was that battery run low on that?
Yeah, I had notification pop and said battery was on. That doesn't move back to that wall.
No. Yes.
One 8 weeks out.
About 5 days ago was about the time that started. Yeah. So the last 5 days, fantastic. You know, we can never get them on a solid school schedule. And I'll be honest, school drop-offs and pickups is kind of rough. And I think it's because of that lack of regular schedule. That consoles, Thanksgiving, Christmas is all forward. So we're being patient with occupations, it's a big thing. So over in North Kansas City, there's going to be a childhood education center. It's actually a Gladstone.
Okay, that's fine. That's the,
Which is beautiful, by the way. Like, the inside of that thing is amazing. Yeah. They've got more students there than I originally thought they did. They do a lot of special education there, and then they have like 4 classes of preschool. And they offer a lot of other services, like teen moms services. What was it, what is one? So most of the services that are offered here for individuals should get promotion. They still do some stuff over here, but they. I feel like charge that. Yeah.
No.
I think they do that, like the school sign up for the children sign up there every year. We had, you know, like a, go, the Clay County Sheriff's Office will be there.
Yeah.
You can sign up for fingerprint, pictures.
It kind of was.
Cards and files for the Sheriff's Office, in the events. So we went there because they had like, you know, them and there, they had just like. But just
we'd be on the way home by now.
That's the only thing I did in that building.
I did, didn't I? Yeah, they were looking for Shoal Creek, Chief up down, yeah, it's a Kansas City incident. And they spoke no English. I can't imagine.
Where are they, Spanish?
They're Spanish.
I would speak that language very little.
Cerveza's about all I know.
I'm gonna have to remember you did geometry, because I got some teenagers that need some help. Call Debbie.
And so I would, yeah. It wasn't.
Question.
Final tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
We're gonna stay up tonight, setting.
Thinking that was just a loss.
You got this.
Yeah.
You can borrow one. For you.
Teacher out there coffee in the morning though.
Yeah.
So we're up enough to drink coffee. I taught in high school. I walked over backpack.
Here you go. Really?
Part-time.
I've heard a ringing man.
man.
I think it's a speaker. 21 years.
Yeah.
Matthew, if that remote's there, you want to turn that TV off?
Do I have a motion to come back in this session?
Do we have all of this?
So maybe.
Second?
Call the roll.
Ma'am, yes. I seconded.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messina,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
You have a motion before the board.
Yes. And I would just, I don't need to remake the motion or remake a second, do we?
No, we're on discussion.
Yeah, I think you had made a motion to table it, but it was not seconded. So
Just back to discussion.
I think we're discussing, you made a motion, it had been seconded, and we were discussing.
The motion is for what?
The motion was to make the city clerk the alternate contact with Mark.
Okay. Call the roll. Was any discussion?
Yes,
Yes.
we were discussing.
We were discussing my concerns about it, you know,
Can't hear.
sorry. I'm used to it, I gotta get back used to it again. We were discussing my concerns about it with someone in that chain, you know, with Murmur, since Murmur is representing the city, would have some type of legal action against the city. I don't feel comfortable with it. I think we should have somebody else in administration, you know, definitely at least for right now, because to me, there could potentially be a conflict of interest.
Mr. Mayor? I think the logical, to me, is the alternate person should be the human resource risk manager. With, you know, dealing with mental issues and everything else, should be the alternate. To me, it's the most
in administration.
Since we have Ms. Fox here, Ms. Fox, is that something that you would feel would be within your job description? Is that something you would want to do?
I'll do it if the board wants me to.
Okay.
Let's take care of the first one and come back for a second, if we need to.
I'll just say from my perspective, I don't know if it's something we would necessarily want to get an attorney's perspective on, but I don't see any reason that we would restrict any employees' contact to Myrma. I think as of right now, Mr. Chapman doesn't restrict it from talking to Myrma or Myrma talking to him, so I wouldn't see any reason that we would need to further restrict that, but that would be my perspective.
Well, I think this is like determining what the call tree order is for Myrma. When Myrma's like, hey, I need to contact Pleasant Valley for XYZ, they hit the primary. If the primary is not available, they hit the secondary. Like I think that's what this isn't talking about who the outgoing, like who's authorized to talk to Myrma.
Yeah,
And I agree with the concerns. There's definite conflict of interest if
Yes, there is.
if what's that?
There is a conflict of interest.
Were you disagreeing with me, or did you have something
Yes,
to add?
I'm agreeing.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, lost train of thought.
I understand what you're saying.
We got it.
Okay. But, okay, that was what I was gonna say. But generally speaking, if there wasn't legal action by the city clerk, I think the office of the city clerk would be the appropriate second person, which we can revisit when that legal action is settled. Okay, that's my perspective. Thank you.
Anything else, any other discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
So what are we voting on? It's still the original vote to make the city clerk the alternative
Number
contact.
contact.
Gallagher,
No.
Bessemer,
No.
Jacoby,
No.
Scarborough,
No.
Crawford,
No.
Moss,
No, sir.
Langman,
No.
Olson.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll make your one.
Mr. Mayor, I so move or make a motion that the alternative, the job, which should be the human resource risk manager, to be the alternate. Second.
Does it have to say from Myrna or anything like that?
Yeah, Myrna, alternate representative.
No, you don't want the human resource person here?
No, I said I so moved to make the human resource risk management
The
the alternate.
$10
For Myrna.
meetings.
No,
No.
Myrna,
No, for
alternate.
to be
The alternative contact.
contact from there it is.
Do I have a second?
I do.
Any other discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Bessemer,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
No.
Okay, anything else? Okay. Mr. Funk, please come forward.
So I submitted a board report in the packet. It wasn't in the packet, so I set one on you guys' desk before the meeting. It's primarily an update on Kale Stormwater Project. That's all I have to report. I don't know if you have any questions. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, probably not. I like to give you guys an update every meeting on the Kale.
So culvert's in, streets open.
Yeah. The culvert boxes are in. They've got temporary road surface for them to work. You could drive across it right now, but it's still blocked off because it's not safe. And they are building the downstream splash pond, getting ready to do the toe walls, then they'll do the wing walls, then they'll do the head wall, then they'll do the drain inlet boxes, then they'll do curb gutter sidewalk, then they'll pave it.
Okay.
Any
Anybody else
questions
got
on
something
that?
for me?
All right.
Thank you.
And I'll see you all on next week.
Next to you too.
Chief Knudsen, please come forward and
Also provide a written report if anybody has any questions on that.
I think you did an excellent job with the kids Saturday on the fire trucks.
Yeah, I got a lot of good people that put a lot of time in, so I'm really appreciative of everybody that showed up and helped out.
And thank you for going upside.
Yep. Yeah, they got some good feedback, so they were.
Yeah, they got some good.
They even gave stuff to the dogs.
Yeah, we had dog biscuits this time around too.
Oh, boy. There's a lot of them up there.
Yeah.
Janice was very happy.
Anybody got anything from Osmond Esmond?
So has the rubbish on the vacant lot at 6,000 Rodina block been all burned up now? Or
I
taken
hope
away?
so. I think,
Two fires at the same
we'll
spot.
notify codes on it. It's a vacant lot that, obviously nobody's there tending it at the time, so, yeah.
So that's one of the side of the check.
I think so.
Yeah, we got that. Yeah, it's been done.
Okay.
Has been.
So there's an ordinance, another question. There's an ordinance in our packet to do with Missouri Conservation Department.
Yes.
You want to talk about
It's
that?
update, it's supposed to be, it's a mutual aid agreement with them that is updated every 5 years. Part of it is, about wildland fires, we agree, if we're gonna fight wildland fires in our area, they need to have if we need help with them, we would ask for it. Same way goes with them, and also they have used equipment, if we have mutual aid agreement with them, we have the ability to request, equipment from them.
Years ago, Chief Wheeler got a Jeep, kind of something back in the day. So, yeah.
So that is what that is.
So on this agreement, the legal name of the fire department, Pleasant Valley Fire Department, Clay County, and then Pleasant Valley would need to be filled in on this agreement.
Yes. Yeah, it was just given to us so we can present to you, and then we can, that would be filled in, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I do have one other thing. I did get an update on the delivery date for the ambulance, and it has been moved to July 14th.
July one?
July 14th.
Really?
July-ish.
We started this 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, we did put it on hold for a while, and then we got started up again, then COVID hit, so everything, was messed up.
Anybody else got anything? Thank you, Chief. Again, I want to congratulate you on your shopping with the kids.
It went real well.
How many kiddos?
We were able, we're supposed to be 5 families, ended up being 4 with 6 kids total. All brand new, we've never done those kids before, so they enjoyed it. I had the car report in front of you. It was a pretty busy month. One thing I wanted to bring up about that is one of our shootings happened right outside the Civic Center at one of the rentals that was there that night. I know it's been discussed before, and I think it needs to be brought up again about the discussion with having an off-duty officer mandatory for probably somebody that has a party that serves alcohol. I know we've discussed it. I don't know if we brought it up to the civic organization yet.
We have not, just
direction of the city, we'll take it from there.
Yeah. That's where a lot of our big problems happen. And most cities require an off-duty officer, like OMO does, when they serve alcohol at their facility. So I think it definitely needs to be brought up for discussion again. Pleasant Valley probably couldn't do it every weekend just because we're so short-staffed.
Right.
So we would do what we could and then open it up to Clay County to have them fill in the gaps. And that we may not be able to get every party that serves alcohol, but I think we can get a majority. I think it put a lot of this to stop.
About 2 or 3 years ago, we had the problem where they all left the Civic Center and went to the Quick Trip down here. 40 or 50 of them went in there and stole everything they could. And this situation is only going to get worse due to the fact when those apartment buildings go in, they're going to have a big swimming pool out there, and they're going to have parties, and alcohol is going to be present. I don't know whether we got to put it in an ordinance that if they in the Civic Center are going to have, I mean, I don't mind them renting out for events, but if they're going to have alcohol, they've got to have police officers for public safety. You know, it only stands to reason, but it's going to get worse if that pool gets in there. So I don't know whether it goes into ordinance or not, but I'd like to, Mayor Slater, or Mr. Slater?
Yes, sir.
Can you have the civic organization's president come over here so he knows what's happening when we address this thing? If we could table it for next meeting and have him here so he can hear us talk about this and try to get this into some kind of ordinance.
I will reach out to Mr. Alice. In the meantime, maybe the chief and I can work with Mr. Alice on that too.
Okay.
Would it be reasonable for the civic organization to require the party that's reserving where alcohol is served to provide their own off-duty police officer?
I don't know.
How this would work, they would.
You'd run the post, wouldn't you? Because if somebody's up here not qualified to work in Clay County.
Yeah, you'd have to be post certified here in Clay County. But how I envisioned it was they would just charge an extra, say $250. Or to hire one of us off duty, they would then pay the officer from their pocket with a check. It's like a 1099.
Right.
That's what it is.
At least we know what we're getting here, Ruth,
True.
instead of the unknown.
The rent-a-cop.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, if I understand right, that independence requires that, you know, that two officers were present if there's alcohol. And I think they said, yeah, that the people with the venue had to provide it. You know, they
Right.
hired now, yeah.
Anthony, does that have to be a normal rate like $250?
It's probably about $60 an hour right now for off duty. Roughly.
And then we would just require that it's for the entire rental time.
Yes, and that was something we discussed too, because some of them rent it out past midnight.
Yeah.
So if they do 6 hours, well, you know, it's for 6 hours
Yeah.
of off duty time.
May I address it? The rule is you need to be out by 1 a.m., but the problem is if you rent it Saturday night and also Sunday, you don't have to be out until Sunday or Monday morning at 1 a.m. And that's where the problem would come in. So we'd have to make sure that if there were people there during that whole time, you'd have a police officer on duty.
So that it would just be required for the amount of hours that they have rental. And then if we need to have multiple police officers who switch a shift or something, would that be how you'd handle something
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that?
yeah,
Is that
like I said,
law?
if we could manage it.
Okay.
I mean, if you can't, then it's just gonna go unmanned.
Okay.
Like for instance, New Year's Eve, it won't stop at midnight, so you're out there by 1.
Okay.
So
You know, there's off duty everywhere, and then they can't fill it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have mutual aid with Clay Como too, right? Couldn't they come up?
I would rather say.
First one, Clay County, you know, and in dire straits.
I would think legally you would be safer just having us or Clay County.
Well, yeah.
So would you want to try and have a motion prepared for the next meeting? Or just discuss
Yeah,
preparing the motion?
I'd
for the
like
next meeting?
for the president of the civic organization to be here, so he knows what's going on and can tell his constituents what's happening.
So, but should we direct, Mr. Chapman to write an ordinance for it, so that way it's ready for the next meeting? I would think that probably we can make sure that passes at that meeting.
We should have our lawyer write that ordinance, being it's a police matter.
We also want to make sure it's not discriminatory, because originally we were talking about quinceaneras, and you can't do that. You have to
Say what?
just quinceaneras, and you can't do something like that.
I'm not really sure what the rights are, you know, but if they.
Can you move forward again? Sorry.
Just do it again. I said, I'm not really sure what the rental, and Dave, maybe you could help me out. How much it costs to rent for 6 hours?
The fee for an entire day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, is $900 throughout the week, Monday through Thursday is $300. You have to have a $500 deposit.
Okay, so potentially we're going to be adding probably about $400 to the rental.
Yeah, it's going to cut down on rentals.
Okay.
That's just for alcohol, right?
Yeah. Just alcohol, yeah,
So,
but that's-
I mean, you have auctions over there and everything
Right.
else, so I mean,
If you wanted a bridal baby shower and you weren't doing any.
Right. The problem is, you don't want to just say birthday parties, because some of those birthday parties get crazy.
if they have alcohol.
They do, but I think if you just say alcohol,
Yeah, very close.
So
that's
If you
what
just say alcohol, then you're not being biased.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you gonna have a lawyer write up something there?
And Mr. Slater will, yes.
I thought Mr. Slater was saying he was getting with.
Yeah, we want to talk to Mr. House, figure out a number and.
see,
See what
that's,
they say.
if I may, we meet with Mr. Alice at the next board meeting. Before that, Chief and I will meet with him. Then he goes to a civic meeting the second Monday of the month, and then we bring back an ordinance on the third Monday.
Okay.
That's fine. Just so everybody knows what's going on here.
Because
That'd be the proper way to handle it.
if the chief is okay with you to delay it. nothing.
Yes. The only other thing I have is I'll need to go into closed session for a hiring of a part-time police officer. Take less than 5 minutes.
We want that ordinance won't be in before New Year's Eve.
Anybody got anything else for the chief?
Do we have to do the closed session now?
Should we go through
No, we
the,
can add it.
yeah, we
If
should.
you can, if you don't mind.
Board Administrator Everhart, you got anything?
Attorneys.
I do. I provided a written report as well as some notification of my absence. That is why Mrs. Doss is going to be on the personnel agenda for reinstating her for primarily just court night on January 13th. The only other thing is it was brought to my attention by the prosecutor that they were not getting paid what I had put in the budget. So it was approved on the budget, but HR did provide me the ordinance. The ordinance was not updated to reflect the same salary as what the judge and prosecutor were told in the budget. So I suppose my request is to do a new ordinance for January 1st, appointing the judge and the prosecutor their salaries starting January 1st with the reflection of what we're budgeting for January 1st of 25.
I think we'll need to talk to legal counsel about that because the ordinance states 2-year term to commence on this date.
Until,
Would
yeah,
push
it
it to
shall,
7/1 of 2025.
right, it says shall continue until changed by the board. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that caps would.
Remain in
that
effect for
way.
no less than 2 years.
Right,
Yeah, so we'll have to talk to legal counsel.
well, that is my request then.
Anybody else got a question for it? You got anything else?
No.
Alderman Jacoby.
Yes, I do. I have a request from the court to approve reinstatement of court clerk Katie Doss, pay grade 110, step 3, 18.21 per hour, effective 12/16/24.
Second?
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes?
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langner,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
And then for the fire department, I have a request for approval of annual rate increase for Aspen. Okay, firefighter EMT, pay grade 100 at step 3 at $15.90 per hour, effective 12/22/24.
Second?
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes?
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langner,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
That's all I have.
Alderman Mesmer, you got anything from
I received this evening the budget report through 11:30. Haven't had an opportunity to look at that. Mr. Slater provided some documents on our desks this evening. Would you like to speak about these?
Absolutely. Did you get a copy, does everybody have a copy of the ending balances? Because I did not make copies for everybody.
Okay.
We'll get those to you, but in a nutshell, we've got, you will get every month the claim on cash general, street, sewer, and capital improvements, and the monthly change from the last month. And this month, I had said it will go down. I was wrong, because this is good news. The average sales tax for the first 10 months was $71,000 a month. This month, it was $85,388, so an increase of $14,000. The average use tax has been $45,773. This month was $78,579, which brought in $32,000 more than what we were expecting. And the combined increase is $46,930.35 from just the sales tax alone. So property taxes start coming in January. I was very concerned a couple months ago because the general fund was at 455, and in November it's 305,000, and as it should be going down every month until the property taxes come in. But we are allocating the expenses where we can legally to the proper funds. We are also watching some other things too, and one of the big reasons why the big jump was in October, because we had 3 payrolls, but people in all the investments nailed this one, just the use tax stuff, because people are buying Christmas gifts. So it should be really solid next month and also in January. So we'll get copies of this sent out to everybody. And it's just a little balance sheet, not of every account, but the 4 main ones. There's a lot of tic-tac ones. Okay.
Got anything else? Okay, let's go to council bill.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read Council Bill 3574?
Yes, please do.
An ordinance approving the application to extend for 6 months until June 30th, 2025, a conditional use permit to allow temporary storage of vehicles on property generally located at 8601 Pleasant Valley Road in accordance with Chapter 400 zoning regulations of the Pleasant Valley Municipal Code. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to ask for a motion and a second to pass Council Bill 3574 on the first and place it on the second?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll, please.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
No, sir.
Lanier,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Okay, cool. No.
We do have a representative here. We have a representative here if anybody wants to hear from her.
You want to hear from her?
You're good, right? She's fine.
Waste and trails, it's okay.
You want to come up and speak?
It's fine. I said, I didn't know if you knew she was here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for being here, Melissa. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read Council Bill 3574?
Yes.
An ordinance approving the application to extend for 6 months until June 30th, 2025, a conditional use permit to allow temporary storage of vehicles on property generally located at 8601 Pleasant Valley Road in accordance with Chapter 400 zoning regulations of the Pleasant Valley Municipal Code. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to ask for a motion and second to pass Council Bill 3574 as ordinance 3573?
Yes, please do.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
No, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read Council Bill 3575?
Yes, please do.
An ordinance approving an agreement between the City of Pleasant Valley, Missouri and the Missouri Department of Conservation for fire and EMS mutual aid services. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to ask for a motion and a second to pass Council Bill 3575 on the first and place it on the second?
Yes, please do.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read Council Bill 3575?
Yes, please do.
An ordinance approving an agreement between the City of Pleasant Valley, Missouri and the Missouri Department of Conservation for fire and EMS mutual aid services. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to ask for a motion and a second to pass Council Bill 3575 as ordinance 3573?
Yes, please do.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read Council Bill 3576?
Yes, please do.
An ordinance approving an agreement between the City of Pleasant Valley, Missouri and Time Clock Plus LLC, a lad tech, for time clock software services. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to ask for a motion and a second to pass Council Bill 3576 on the first and place it on the second?
Yes, please do.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read Council Bill 3576?
Yes, please do.
An ordinance approving an agreement between the City of Pleasant Valley, Missouri and Time Clock Plus LLC for time clock software services. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to ask for a motion and a second to pass Council Bill 3576 as ordinance 3575?
Please do.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Chapman, call the roll.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messinger,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Is there any old business? Any new business?
She's would like a closed session, and I would like for the council to be able to go back there with the chief of police and the city clerk.
Number 39.
310-021, yeah. Our environment.
I move that we enter closed section pursuant to RSMO 610-021, subsection 3, hiring, firing, disciplining, promoting. And have in attendance the full board, Matthew Chapman, and the police chief, Jared McGinley.
Second.
Guys are all orange.
Sorry, my inflection wasn't
I
right.
know, I was like, I didn't think you were done.
Through the middle roster.
Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would like the department heads to be able to go if they're not called back there.
We'll go through this motion and then we can
Yeah.
discuss the department heads. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Any discussion? Call the roll, Mr. Chapman.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Messina,
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Langman,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Do I have a motion for adjournment?
We have to go into closed session.
Oh, closed session.
Can we dismiss the department
To
heads?
dismiss the department heads that are asked to participate in the closed session.
Does that have to be via motion?
HR director.
Okay, yeah. I don't think that has to be via.
Your battery's good. I'm gonna wind this cord up. while you got it.
I don't know. Yes, you guys can come.
You all can go home if you want to.
Well, I can, I put it.
Well, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
You're running for mayor.
Paying all the-
I'm sorry. I know. There's just.
Right.
There's something wrong with
Yeah, right. What am I on that? Yours.
Just like old times. Remember when we started 7 at the earliest?
We'll see you later.
See ya.
I'm ready for summer already. I can do spring. Spring sounds really lovely. I'm not liking cold weather. Do not like it anymore. Oh, no, actually, January 6th coordinator, and I'm out for a while. Yeah, the broken rock. You write your decisions yet?
So I know we're ready.
Yeah, I've got 15 minutes.
Sorry.
Oh, Jared said.
That was expensive.
I just went in for like a routine checkup. They were gonna do something to my hips and they were like, oh, let's take some x-rays. I am scared to death of it. Because now I have scoliosis and stenosis. Collapsed fusion.
This shouldn't take long.
And I keep thinking,
This is, got to decide if they want to.
yeah. Well, as much as I regret going to the doctor. I mean, well, as active as I am, she said, what if I would have snapped it like all the way? I mean, it's snapped either way, but she's like,
See,
could
that's
have been
my-
a lot worse.
That's my biggest fear.
They put in a bone right up for fusion. That it's, I've had x-rays and MRIs and everything that's,
Oh, sorry.
oh,
Oh,
so
yeah.
many times you can't even see the
My
eye.
husband's is too.
Yeah.
What makes me mad is I was like, you can just take them out. You know, it's been 6 years, take them out. She's like, there was so much, since it was a burst fracture, there's so much bone missing that she put like filler in that I can never just take them out.
So it wouldn't.
Oh, it was like snap. I'm like, well, shit. Okay. Yeah. Well, so the problem with me and pain meds is they wear off super quick. My mom was a hardcore druggie, so it must just be in my like blood. So they like overdose me and then they have to be taken out. Even today, I just went and had like my teeth cleaned and they numbed the side. I'm drooling. Inwardly.
teeth cleaning?
Yeah, because they did deep right here. And it was gone. She's like, take it. Let's tell you. It was
That's not good.
Yeah, that's not good.
That would not be good for me.
I know, I was like, I hope surgeon reads
Right. Put before you knock me out.
Oh, you got to go, ow, I can feel that now.
Hey,
There's a little more fentanyl.
I will not lie. I've never cared for drugs. I've never done anything, never smoked pot, nothing. Fentanyl, I can 100% see why people, I mean, gone, pain, nothing.
They gave me just a little bit to move me after my surgery upstairs. And I remember going in the elevator, I remember hearing voices, I remember rolling into my room, and the people standing there, and that's it for a couple hours. The rest was
See, when I
gone.
was in the hospital last week,
I was like,
they
that was
wanted
so
to give me
horrible.
fentanyl, and they were like, no.
Oh, yeah.
Roll dose. I don't say no.
Afraid of it.
And
It's way safer than Dilaudid.
And more people are
She won't let me have
They did not give me
Yeah,
morphine.
and more people have allergic reactions.
Yes.
It was a freaking nightmare on morphine.
That's funny.
And I had one of the nurses tell me, it was a male nurse, and he said, it happens with men in morphine. And he said a lot of men become very aggressive with morphine.
My husband
Really?
said they gave me fentanyl and Dilaudid, and I couldn't, like, it couldn't control the pain. So they kept doing it enough to where they had to put me in a medical coma to get it out of my system. Because I'm like, I was 90 pounds. But I would definitely take fentanyl.
See,
but they don't let you have it in rehab,
appropriately.
so they gave me fentanyl in the ambulance all the way up to Madonna, the first rehab. Cold turkey. They don't give you that shit in rehab. They're like, oh, sorry, you get no pain meds. Here's Tylenol.
Tough it out.
And they were like, you're gonna suffer for 2 days. And it burned right out of my system in like 3 hours.
See,
So
my
they're like,
mom had,
give it
my
back.
mom had a fentanyl pain pump implant. She
Lovely.
had so much,
How old was she?
78, but she had, her body was riddled with cancer, and then it was in her bone, and so they did that implant, and she was scared to death of it. She would never, I mean, all she had to do was use the bolus just to increase it, you know, a little bit. She was horrified.
That's what I don't get when people are put on hospice and end of life, when the family's like, okay, there's more to keep them comfortable. You're not going to get in trouble for overdosing. They didn't give you enough. They gave you enough and can keep them very comfortable, which is so much easier.
We did that with my stepmother.
Yeah.
She walked into the hospital. She was maybe 3 days, but she told me, anything done, pain managed, I'm ready to die. After about 8 hours, the doctor, she's in a little bitty town in Kansas, and both of the doctors were fresh out of med school, and both of them said, this is what she wants, and this is what I recommend. We're gonna put a bag on and give you the money, and you can push it every 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Yeah, there's a lot on it.
And,
So many times over.
yeah. So I sat there and did one bag and the second top, the second bag, she did the last bag.
Oh, wow.
She's just,
And it was weird because she'd had a light stroke. But she had brain damage. But she was with it enough when she got to the hospital. She yelled that everybody in the hospital knew she was.
Yeah, that's what I never will
That's as good as tattooed across your chest.
Right?
Signed and dated by the attorney.
The doctor said, well, I think everybody in this hospital knows what Jan Galligan wants done. But you know what? Good for her.
It was a blessing because
Good for her.
she did, because she could have well prolonged and lived like
Yeah.
and not be able to take care of herself. And nobody wants that. When you're a sound mind, nobody wants that.
I used to work for a painter for a while when I was younger, and he says, all right, here's the deal, Jim. And he's a bass player, and he's kind of painted all his life. He goes, now, my wife and I have this deal. There's a handle underneath the driver's seat with a red handle on it. He goes, if I fall off this ladder and I don't get up in 2 minutes, he goes, you with the hammer and you finish the job, because I'm worth more dead than I am alive as a vegetable. And he goes, that's what my wife wants. And I said, yes, sir. You got it, buddy. He goes, that's the only requirement to keep this job. Go with that hammer, you may look like an accident. Okay.
Where you going, Ruth?
I have got to use Old Roseville,
Okay.
please.
We gotta vote on that.
Yeah. Yeah, go home.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I thought, I was waiting for this whole time.
Well, Ripley going on.
Yeah, we did. It's delightful.
I was gonna try it through the first year.
You just took up what the thing, like I said, he said, you could do it in 2 motions, or you can do it. Plus, I just both of them.
Yeah, I saw you driving the.
I moved.
Do I have a motion to come out of closed
Well,
session?
Ruth's not here.
Motion to come out of closed session.
We're still missing.
Do I have a second?
Ruth is not here.
Doesn't matter.
We can't call it because Ruth is not here.
We'll just put her in as absent.
Okay, we'll just, I'll answer for her.
Yeah.
There's
She's doing it all.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's dry.
Oh, you made a second motion. Tom, did you make this, did you make the motion to adjourn?
Yes, now.
Who said we were waiting?
Make a motion to come out of closed session.
Second, okay.
Now
Call
we
the,
can
call
vote.
the names.
Gallagher.
Yes.
What are we voting on?
To adjourn.
Come out of closed session.
No, we already did
You
that.
did that good.
We did that in there.
Yes.
Jacoby,
Yes.
Scarborough,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes, sir.
Minor.
Yes.
Yes.
Is there any motion coming out of closed session?
Oh,
No.
We're adjourned.
Okay, then do I have a motion for adjournment?
Well, we already did
already
that.
did
That's
it.
just it.
Already did that?
Oh, my.
Now you understand.
I'm bringing a pillow and a blanket next to me.
Yes.
Well,